today's session that we're in right now, Seed is Liberation, is the first of two sessions today that are focused on the Union for the Protection of New Plant Varieties, otherwise known as UPOV. This first section will focus on the social dynamics and impacts of UPOV, and the panel in concurrent session E later today will focus on the legal dynamics of UPOV. So I encourage you all to consider joining both conversations. They've been designed to work well with one another and complement each other. So as far as this panel, our first one, Seed is Liberation, the dominant industrial agricultural system treats seed as a commodity to be exploited, not as a right to be protected, largely. And in order to reclaim the rights and agency lost to corporate consolidation, we all need to be invested in the movement to reclaim seed. That movement currently hinges on its capacity to confront policies and treaties that marginalize and criminalize seed saving around the world. Chief among them is the Union for Protection of New Plant Varieties, UPOV, a treaty responsible for stripping seeds from the hands of farmers and turning over control to corporate breeders. Confronting UPOV legally has proved extraordinarily difficult given the ways in which it's embedded within powerful institutions like the World Trade Organization. Ultimately, returning seeds to their rightful place within communities will require a mass movement. To catalyze this movement, we need to tell a new story about seed, one that recognizes the power in community and autonomy through seed sovereignty, and that understands the corporate control of biodiversity as part of a long history of extraction from the global south. So today's panel is an opportunity to share ways in which our collective struggles, hopes, and liberation are connected through seed and through resistance to UPOV. From here, I'm going to pass the mic over to Justin Sardo, who I am pleased to introduce. Justin is a member of Growing Culture. A Growing Culture is a nonprofit working to catalyze action in the food sovereignty movement through storytelling. Through stories and deep grassroots partnerships, their approach draws focus and resources to the peasant and indigenous communities whose sovereignty struggles hold the key to a biodiverse and dignified future for all. Justin, please take it away.
Thank you, Kat. I really appreciate the introduction and I appreciate everyone being with us today. I'll just introduce a little bit about why we're having this conversation and how we hope this conversation can go. Ultimately, as Kat mentioned, we've split the UPOV discussion into two key pieces. There's a lot of rich complexity in terms of the legal history of UPOV, how it's bound up in the long history of seed rights and seed treaties, seed policies, and seed trade. And so the second panel today will be more focused on outlining exactly how that history has progressed. Today, we're going to be taking a slightly different angle. Ultimately, I think we can focus on the problems like UPOV and all the things that are needing to be resisted in regards to seed sovereignty. But UPOV could be dismantled and something else could be put in its place. At the end of the day, what we have is a history and a trajectory of corporations trying to take what is one of the most valuable and important beings. Seeds are co-evolutionary companions. And this panel is bringing together comrades, some new, some who I've worked with in the past, who Growing Culture, my organization, has worked with in the past, and who have been at the forefront of this struggle for a long time. Ultimately, this is a chance for us to come together and talk about what seed means to us, what it means to collectively be responsible for telling a story about seed that is more compelling than what we have on the other side, than the side that treats seed as just something to be exploited. And I think by ultimately shifting the broader culture around seed, by unifying movements and communities who are doing this work around the world, and who all of the panelists that you're going to be seeing today represent through their respective organizations, I see it as that is how we actually can create lasting change. So without too much further introduction, we're going to be having an open conversation here, in the same way that seed saving is a intergenerational and perpetual conversation between communities and seeds and land. We want to leave this open to be more free-flowing. We have questions that we want to kind of frame our conversation around, but please hit us in the chat. Anything that comes up that strikes you, questions that you have, thoughts, please feel free to contribute. You know, we're all responsible for being a part of this movement and this conversation, and so we'd love to invite you all to join with us. So I'll introduce our panelists today. We have Edwin Baffour. Edwin is the communications director for Food Sovereignty Ghana, which is a grassroots movement of Ghanaians, home and abroad, dedicated to the promotion of food sovereignty in Ghana. They believe in the collective control over resources rather than the control by multinational corporations and other foreign entities. And on November of 2021, Food Sovereignty Ghana filed a legal suit at Ghana's Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of UPOV. We also have Ramón Vera Herrera, who is a comrade from GRAIN. GRAIN is a allied advocacy organization, which is devoted to the defense of seeds and local food systems and territories. He's an editor dedicated to open space for the voice of Native peoples of all Mexico and the Americas. Ramón heads 2 magazines as part of his work at GRAIN, and both magazines are dedicated to convey the struggles, history, and resistance of peasant and indigenous communities. And then Francis Davies, who I have to give a big shout out, because Francis is actually my introduction to UPOV and to this work through a campaign that A Growing Culture co-produced with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Francis is the co-founder and coordinator of the Zambia Alliance for Agroecology and Biodiversity, which is an advocacy network of farmer and civil society organizations that promotes and supports a just and sustainable food and agroecological system in Zambia. She's also the co-lead of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa's Seed Working Group. So these are folks who have deep backgrounds in this work and who I'm deeply inspired by and pleased to have with me for this conversation. And without much further ado, I think we can go ahead and open this up. So I'd love to just start the conversation by inviting all my comrades here to discuss, when did you first become aware of the power of seed and the need for seed sovereignty? I think it's great to start where each of us started on this journey and to just get some insight into how we were led to where we are now. So whoever wants to start.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, Edwin, we can hear you.
Yes, hi, and greetings to all panelists and the audience. I'm very proud to be on such a platform. I have been working with Food Sovereignty Ghana for about 7 years now. In 2015 is when I was introduced by a friend of mine, and they had just started a court case because we had read an article in one of the dailies in Ghana about the Savannah Agricultural Research Institute, which was getting ready to apply for the commercial release of genetically modified cowpeas. And so that was the first time I actually got involved, because I'd heard of the word GMO and all this, but the first time I actually got involved in understanding what the issues were and what the whole, issue was around these seeds that we were going to court for and the need to protect the seeds. And it was in that action that we realized that the issues around seed are so complex, therefore making seed such an important aspect of our society, especially an agrarian society like Ghana, where over 60% of the population are based, their livelihoods come from the land. So 2015 was my first exposure to it, and the complexities of the lobbying, getting the media on the side of the agribusiness lobby, the politicians, traditional leaders, really exposed the fact that this was a very huge issue which normally flies over the heads of most citizens. I believe most citizens in most countries don't know that there is an actual battle for this, what I call assets, biodiversity assets. And that's really what seeds are to me. They are this cultural repository. So 2015 was my first exposure to actually know the value of seed. And since then, everything that has gone on actually says that these things are worth fighting for, they're worth defending, and that really the sustainability of the planet really depends on us safeguarding the biodiversity that our ancestors have all worked so hard to keep and bequeath to us.
Thank you for that. And Francis, Ramón, can I get your stories, your way into this journey?
Go.
Who's gonna go?
Go ahead, Ramón.
Ramón, do you want to go?
Yes, okay. Bueno, yo he trabajado
I've worked
muchos años
for many years
en revistas
for magazines,
que de algún modo me
which somehow allowed me to be involved.
Me sumergieron en el mundo
I was
indígena.
involved in the indigenous world.
Y en el mundo
And
indígena,
in the indigenous world,
las semillas no son
seeds
cosas.
are not things.
Son más bien
They're rather than
ramados de
that, they
relaciones.
are parts of relationships.
Sí, son como
So they are
tejidos, ¿no?
like
Pero conllevan
pieces, parts,
responsabilidades.
but they also involve
Están todo el
responsibilities,
tiempo
which
los
are
pueblos, las
all the
comunidades.
time around communities, towns,
Están todo el tiempo
and they are
buscando
all the time
la libertad de esas
searching
semillas,
for the freedom
pero
of those
siempre
seeds,
con
but
una
always
responsabilidad
with
que es mutua.
responsibility which is mutual.
Esto ha llevado
This has
muchos
led
milenios,
us,
¿no?
has been going on for thousands of years.
Es muy importante que
And
nos
it's
quede
very
claro
important that we have clarity
acerca de la
in terms
historia
of the
interminable de esta
endless
conversación,
history of
como
this
decías,
conversation,
Justin, ¿no?
as Justin said.
Es una conversación
It's
entre
a
nosotros como
conversation
comunidad
among us as a community
y los cultivos
and the
con los
harvest
que nos relacionamos.
that we are related to.
Los pueblos, por ejemplo, en México,
Towns, for instance, in Mexico,
los pueblos como no tanto
towns,
como
not
poblaciones,
just
sino
as
como people.
population, but as people, referring to
Sí.
towns as people.
Sí, los pueblos están siempre
Are always
pensando en que
thinking
las
about
semillas o los
seeds
cultivos
or
de
breeding,
alguna manera les enseñaron a ser comunidad,
that somehow taught them how to become a community,
porque también son
because they're
comunidad.
also a community
De
themselves.
hecho, la
Because
relación tan fuerte
as a
que
matter of
hay
fact, the strong relationship that we have
es una especie de
is
crianza mutua, de
kind of
cultivo mutuo.
mutual breeding.
Sí, nosotros cultivamos las
We
semillas y las
breed,
semillas nos dicen
we
cómo
plant
ser,
seeds and they
nos
tell us
cambian
how
también.
we
Y esa es
have to
justamente la
be. They change us too.
conversación
And
que
that's
ha habido
exactly the
durante
conversation that
tantos
we've had
siglos, ¿no?
for many centuries.
Es decir, todo esto para
That is to say,
hablar del
just
carácter
to
de
talk about
importancia,
the
de
character, the importance,
pertinencia y de
the
eso que
pertinence,
la gente
and
que
all that
está
people
en relación con la
are,
tierra, con la
how people are related
naturaleza,
to the
se
soil,
refiere
to
a esa relación
nature,
como,
and
como
that
sagrada.
refers to that relationship as sacred.
No es solamente
It's not only a matter of
una relación
it's
con
not
algo que
only
es
a
una
matter
cosa
of
que se vende, se
something that is
compra, se
a
avienta
thing or something that you
o que se deshace
throw
uno
or
de
something you
ella, ¿no?
get rid of.
Está en el centro de
That's
nuestra
in
vida.
the center of our lives.
Hey,
Y,
Ramón.
sí,
My apologies for interrupting. I'm hoping I can catch Jose and just check in. We're
Jose.
hearing Ramón at full volume in Spanish on the English channel. Is there a setting that we need to be adjusting? I still hear Ramón even if I choose mute original audio.
Yes, I can
There
hear
may be
Ramon
some
too, and I shouldn't be
feedback.
hearing that. Yeah, I hear you. I know what you mean exactly. I apologize for that. I don't know how that. I only have one computer, one device, nothing else, and I'm on the English channel. I know I shouldn't be. Let me see if I can do something about that. If
Thank
Ramon,
you.
because
Anna.
Ramon is too high. Ramon's volume is too high.
Okay.
Let me
Anna
see.
has an idea.
Well, I think Adrian, hello everyone. I think Adrian, that is a co-host, he also has the mic open. So maybe he closed it, that would help.
Yes, okay.
Is it better now?
and do I have to turn down my mic? No?
I'm
Ramón,
good.
you're good.
Okay. I think I should be good now. I hope I'm good now because I don't hear any other sound other than Ramon's voice in my headsets, but not through a speaker.
Okay. Bueno, entonces la relación es muy antigua y yo he hablado con Justin varias veces acerca de esto y siempre llegamos a un punto que es muy importante, que es la relación es tan fluida y tan interminable.
I apologize for interrupting again, but we're still having the same issue.
Oh,
I'm so sorry,
Ramon.
No.
Let me see here. I'm checking here. My settings good. Sennheiser, microphone. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, my settings are good. I hear Ramon's voice through my headphones, my headsets. So I don't have any microphone. What I could do here is on my headsets, maybe lower Ramon's volume, if that helps. But I'm as far as management of the tool, I believe I'm good. I should be, if it's coming from me, I hope not, but I hope if Ramón could speak a little bit more maybe and see if this.
Sí, es que me pierdo un poco. Bueno, esta relación, hemos hablado Justin y yo y otras gentes con las que hemos conversado, siempre arribamos a la idea de que esta conversación interminable entre los cultivos y la gente o entre las semillas y la gente, entre las semillas y las comunidades, se parece mucho a la relación que tenemos cuando pensamos en el lenguaje, ¿no? El lenguaje es algo que es muy fluido, que va cambiando todo el tiempo no puede ser fijado de alguna manera, de ninguna manera, aunque haya
put it in
unas
a fixed
ciertas
way
reglas,
somehow,
el
although there
lenguaje,
are some rules,
¿no? ¿No?
language.
I wonder if we could just have it go in order. So instead of it being simultaneous, if we could just adjust here, and if Ramon, you could share, and then Jose, if you could come on afterwards.
Oh, consecutive. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I wish. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening either. We
Is
are.
it coming from?
This has worked before, so everything that I see looks like the settings are correct. So why don't we just do that and switch to consecutive?
Vamos entonces. We're gonna change now to consecutive.
Sí.
We'll see. Just Ramon will have the pause. I hope he knows that, but I'll just for me to. I can have a small overlap, but I can speak louder, which I hope doesn't bother you much. But I will try to. Just if I speak louder, I hope that I'll make the other sound or volume sound lower by speaking louder, if that helps. I hope. I haven't.
Sí.
As interpreter here, just whatever. Just I'm willing to. Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe we just need
Ya, yo ya no oigo
English and Spanish were reversed on your settings there, Jose, and maybe that was.
I can do. If I go to the Spanish channel, then give it a try there.
On the Spanish line now.
Here I go.
Now we can hardly hear Rebecca. Oh, that's good. That's good. So for folks who are wanting to listen in English, I think maybe if you just pick Spanish when Ramon is speaking. Yes. Ooh, that grace. Yeah. Well, so let's try that, Ramon, if you wouldn't mind.
No,
Just
está
doing
bien.
a test.
It is. This is my fault because I wanted to speak in Spanish because of the language. Es decir, justamente quise hablar castellano por la idea de la diversidad de los lenguajes y cómo la diversidad de los lenguajes es necesaria para todo lo que tiene que ver con la vida humana, ¿no? Y la diversidad de las culturas y la diversidad de las visiones, todo está relacionado y está tejido, ¿no? Así también son las semillas, así también son los cultivos y tendría que haber no solo una aceptación, sino una celebración.
We should have a celebration of this diversity to be able to establish a relationship that is more fulfilling among us as human beings, and also with nature, with the soil, with the territories that are the source of all those relationships. That's how everything started, by listening to all these people in different spaces, in the indigenous communities in Central America and Mexico and all of Latin America. And that's how the real interest in seeds started. And of course, I ended up understanding that seeds are one of the relationships. I insist on calling this relationship, when referring to seeds, is one of the most important relationships that we have with that nature. So much that we are here, we have the millennials, and we are here talking about how we can stop that from growing. So I don't want to elaborate more because I see that we have the meeting and we're having the conversation, and we'll have more space, more time later to speak more. So I apologize and thank you. I apologize for having this issue with interpretation.
No need to apologize. And I just appreciate all the
por
things
disculparse.
that you.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking in Spanish now. I don't know if I should. Disculpa por. Yeah, I see. Should I go to English and invert everything? Perdón. Voy a regresar un poquito a los temas que estaba usted diciendo anteriormente. Sí.
Francis, can you hear me? Francis? Oh.
Hi. Oh, am I?
Francis, did you hear what I just said? Are you able to catch
No,
that?
I've switched my interpretation off, so I hope you can hear me.
Okay, we might have to go back and forth for right now. Sorry for all the confusion. I was just saying, I wanted to leave some space for you to share that journey, and we can circle back to a lot of the great things that Ramón and Edwin just brought up.
Yeah. So I think thank you to both my other speakers on this panel, and thank you all. It's really wonderful to be here and to be able to share with fellows in on the other continents. It's really, really important. And I think just to add, I think it's a privilege for me to be here, and I speak with a collective presence, and I just want to acknowledge them that it is a privilege to work in the space that I do, and I bring their voices, I hope, into these spaces, and that these kind of connections really can bring more sharing and these kind of discussions, and that's really where my own story with seed started. I grew up in a farming area, in a smallholder farming area in South Africa, and I saw the impact of the corporatization and the privatization and the concentration of our food system, which started with actually the control of seed and livestock genetics, so both, and that relationship then, and how that impacted the entire rest of the food system, and how it impacted so intensely on the community and the entire structure of that community at a very, very broad scale. And then I've been working in the Southern African region for many years now, and I had the privilege of connecting with others, firstly in Zambia, and my entrance into the food system work was through the acknowledgement of the deep crisis of the earth that we face. And I realized that the easiest entry point into that was through food. How we tackle the crisis, the very multiple and complex crisis that we face, was through food. And then I started speaking to farmers in Zambia, working on the ground, and particularly with the Earth jurisprudence leaders and people working with the biodiversity networks. And there was the thread that came through that, in fact, unless we can continue to identify with our seed and acknowledge the power of that and its intrinsic tie to who we are as African, to who we are as people, and to our relationship with Mother Earth, that is a living relationship. And we have to acknowledge that and reclaim that back again, particularly on the African continent, to restore our connection with Mother Earth, with our land, with our food, with our culture, with our dress, with our languages, with our families, and the celebrations, the rites of passage that we go through in life. And until we can acknowledge that and reclaim that and go back to our roots, then we cannot win this fight against the takeover of our food system and against the destruction of our earth, because of that source, that that seed and the control of seed is really a foundation to so much of the other points of control that we're now seeing, the privatization, the extraction of earth and of people, and the destruction of Mother Earth. So seed really is at the center of that, and the center of communities' works in Africa, and the grassroots movement, and then the movements that have built around that. So working with Edwin, Baffour in Ghana, the other networks in Africa, the foundation of those movements really did start around seed, and the push back, the realization of the control that was happening onto the African continent through seed. And so it really remains very much at the center of our work, and of this movement's work, and continues to be a thread that runs through all of the work that we do. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm just picking up so many amazing threads that I want to come back to, but I really want to center us on a big question, which I think all of you have touched on in some aspect or another, which is why have corporations and governments targeted seeds? And I think we can get a little more into UPOV and specific mechanisms by which that's happened. But I think if we could give a little entry point into what you see as that trajectory by which seeds have been that entry point that you were saying, Francis, have been that way to consolidate other control. I'd be curious to hear from whoever has thoughts on that.
Sorry, Justin, just kind of repeat your question.
Yeah, so I just was hoping we could center around why seed. You know, I think all of you have brought up what seed means to you. I think if we can look at the other side and talk a little bit about what corporations and governments have seen in regards to seed, the power that they've identified, and how that you've seen that play out in the lead up to seed treaties and conventions like UPOV. How do you see, you know, in the same way that you all have recognized and claimed the power of seed, that you've seen other folks recognize that power and claim it in the complete opposite way, and what that relationship is, just so we can get a little bit of an entry point to UPOV, we can get all of your perspectives on why seed is so powerful, and then the perspective of, you know, folks on the other side who are trying to consolidate control over it.
Okay. Well, coming from the perspective of the context here in Ghana and Africa in general, seed has always been recognized as a store of wealth, as a repository of culture, and therefore it's an asset. It's always been recognized as a common good. And therefore the kind of structures that have been built around seed and how it fits into society all reflect this common good tag that seeds have. Unfortunately, with the globalization of the world and the fact that you know, Western philosophy has sort of relegated indigenous knowledge of different communities to division 2 and 3, we no longer have a great respect for the indigenous knowledge that has helped to keep this biodiversity, this variety of seeds on the planet available for us to use, and more importantly, for large corporations to want to own these days, because we know that the seed being the basic building block of economics, as far as agriculture, as far as the value chain, as far as the building block of the raw material before you get into an agricultural value chain, it all comes from seed. So the control of that asset has become more and more important in this globalization agenda of the world. And that is what has seen an increase in corporations scampering to introduce laws which will diminish the hold and the ownership by communities that have developed these seeds, and transfer the power to, you know, more private sector holdings, more private sector interests. And I think that is where we've seen the rise of international organizations like UPOV, because that dynamic of the power of seed has played out, and the corporations have, if you want for a better, want of a better word, have wanted to claim a greater stake, have given it more priority or more importance, because the end game is that if you control seed, then you control people's food, you control economies, you control people's ideology and everything from there. And seed being a basic human right connected with food, more and more and more is becoming more of an asset to control. And so it began with subtle efforts by international organizations to become relevant in the seed sector. And then these same organizations, international institutions, would advise governments on how to reduce the public sector involvement in seed production, so that there's more transition to the private sector, where the private sector is controlled by capital, which comes from very powerful interest groups. So the fact that the benefits and the importance around seed is now being recognized is a reflection of the fight to stake, territories with seed.
Sí, yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con lo que está diciendo Edwin. Me parece muy importante.
I'm in total agreement with what Edwin was saying.
Es muy
To me, it's very
importante que
important
entendamos
to understand, for us to understand
la fuerza que
the
tiene la
strength that we
agricultura
have,
independiente,
the independent agriculture,
es decir, la agricultura de los pueblos, de las comunidades,
agriculture
de la gente,
of communities and towns and people.
Sí. Y a partir de eso tenemos que entender que hay desde hace muchos siglos que empezó,
for many
pero ahora
centuries when this started, but
es muy
nowadays
fuerte la guerra contra la subsistencia.
Against
La guerra contra
livelihood is stronger.
Contra las comunidades campesinas, contra la gente que practica una agricultura independiente. Y por supuesto las
breeders
son,
and people who have an independent agriculture activity.
Las semillas son la clave de todo esto.
Seeds are the key to all this.
Este querer apropiarse de toda la cadena alimentaria
to be the owners of the complete food chain
es muy crucial para las
crucial to corporations.
Y por supuesto quisieran que la gente de las comunidades dejara de sembrar, dejara de producir comida por cuenta propia, no pudiera resolver las cuestiones más fundamentales que les importan.
Matters that they care about, because
that's a un trabajo
it's possible to
enajenado, asalariado,
sometido under a system where they are subordinates, where they have a paid job.
Y por supuesto esto tarde o temprano
of course, sooner or
les
later,
expulsa de los territorios,
kicks them out of those territories,
y esa gente puede convertirse en obreros, pero ya no quieren, ya no tendrán la posibilidad de sembrar su propia comida, de resolver sus propias necesidades, y todo esto fortalece a las corporaciones que producen alimentos y que tienen todo un proceso, un metabolismo
a process and a metabolism
que va desde acaparar la tierra y los territorios,
which means becoming owners of territories and land.
Y de ahí cambian el uso del suelo.
And from there they change the use of land.
Lo deforestan, ¿sí?
They deforest that.
y por supuesto someten a la gente a un
And of
trabajo
course, they
asalariado,
make people be governed by a waged paid job as
y
factory
entonces
workers.
empiezan a sembrar
So they start planting,
controlando todo el sistema alimentario,
controlling the food system,
local, regional, nacional,
locally,
internacional,
regionally, internationally,
hasta llegar
to the
a las
point
grandes
where
cadenas,
they have the big chains,
sí, las grandes cadenas
the
de
big chains
supermercados
of supermarkets
y de comercialización de
and
alimentos.
commercialization of food and commercialization.
Pero es importante que
So it's
eso
important
nos quede
that
claro que empieza
we need to have clarity
en la pequeña
that
comunidad,
starts in small
impidiendo
communities,
que la gente
not allowing people to
use y guarde
use
e
and
intercambie
keep
sus
and
semillas.
interchange their seeds.
I'm registering, so we had a couple questions come in while you both were speaking. I think maybe we can make an entryway into UPOV itself and talk about, seed privatization and consolidation has been happening for a long time, as Hayden pointed out, and what has made it so that UPOV is coming in now in such full force. Maybe, I don't know, I'm happy to give a little bit of an overview, but if anyone wants to give an entryway to UPOV and how they see it kind of progressing in the past decades and what has made it such a concern and such a threat now, when there are other factors, when there are seed patents, when there are other systems in place to control seeds, why UPOV and why in the past few decades has it become such a significant problem?
Justin, I'm happy for you to come in, but I think just to say is from my understanding that, UPOV has been around for a long time, just other versions of it that were not quite as restrictive. And there is a huge thrust now, a final push, really, we see on the African continent to grab the last remaining resources and spaces of power where they can be controlled from outside. And as we've already said, is that seed is a very core node of control, right at the entry point of the entire rest of the food system. And as Ramón has said, that determines and the entire rest of our agriculture systems. So the type of seed that is available on the market will determine the kind of agriculture systems that we are able to use and to be part of. And if there are only a particular type of commercialized, privatized seed on the market, when you control the market, then that is the only type of agriculture which is about people and land use that can then continue. And so I think what's really interesting is that it's a lot of funding directive as well, but this real sense of kind of the last scrabble, particularly in Africa, and funding from corporations, funding from donors coming through trade agreements, and also that it's an interesting how in European countries we see countries actually trying to get out of UPOV, while the same countries through their foreign policy are pushing our countries into UPOV 91 and strengthening their power. But Justin, go ahead. I know you've also been doing a lot of work on things at the global level.
Yeah, so I can people on the panel might not be familiar with this body or treaty at all. And so I want to meet people where they're at. Obviously, it's very complex, but just to give a bit of an overview. So UPOV came up in 1961. It came out of Europe's response to patents, which really was centered in the US. And, the rise of plant variety protection and breeders' rights was a way to be able to assert market control for plant breeders, specifically corporate plant breeders, without getting people too worried about the fear of patents. And so initially in 1961, it was proposed as a convention through the Paris Convention on Intellectual Property. It became its own body, its own intergovernmental body, and it formed a convention and a private treaty that countries originally didn't really sign on to. So there were only 6 European countries at first. UPOV was amended 2 different times. Each time it's made it more and more restrictive. UPOV calls for, or essentially gives corporate plant breeders the ability to claim ownership over varieties of crops, of plants, to say that they invented them and to be paid royalties as a result. Originally, the earlier versions gave still farmers the ability to still save and exchange their seeds in smaller amounts, and for researchers to be able to breed seeds for future development. 1991, the most recent iteration, it criminalizes those things. So now, as of UPOV 91, there is no potential for farmers to save the seeds that they've historically saved. Once corporate plant breeders go and get a handful of those seeds, select them for a few seasons, and then claim ownership over them. So now corporations control those varieties, and that means that any use of those varieties means you either have to pay, you get punished by a fine, or you can have your harvest seized because that belongs to the breeder now. And what we've seen is it's a mechanism for essentially criminalizing the very practices that provided corporations the seeds that they started with in the first place. And I think what's really been remarkable over the past decades is that UPOV has been pitched as the main way to meet the requirements, TRIPS, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, which is a requirement for World Trade Organization membership. So essentially, in order to be able to be a country that engages with global trade, which every country has to now in order to survive, that means that you have to agree to TRIPS, and it's pitched as you have to sign on to UPOV. That's not actually the case, but that's how it's presented. It's not a treaty through the UN. It's not through some intergovernmental body of, that represents an actual force of countries and democracy. It's a private treaty that's imposed and leveraged through trade. And so I think in the past few decades, that consolidation has happened because it's been an arm of the World Trade Organization. And so, I don't know if anyone else has thoughts and wants to hop onto that.
Yeah, well, it's, as you said, Justin, over the years since UPOV was introduced, obviously it's become more rigid. So you look at, the version of UPOV 1978 versus UPOV 1991, the more later versions have become more rigid, less flexible. And this is actually when developing countries are joining, because the majority of countries that belong to the earlier versions are actually developed countries. So where the bulk of the resources are coming from, which is the global south, now the terminology and the protocols are much more rigid. In fact, on the African continent, UPOV has gone a step further beyond itself and has sort of working in collaboration with the Africa Regional Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO. And so sort of on the backdoor side of UPOV, African governments are being encouraged to be a part of ARIPO, which essentially is a UPOV in a more like a regional version of UPOV, which seems less harmful, but actually is meant to achieve the same sort of control of seeds, to introduce the same kind of legislature into the countries, which allow these rights of intellectual multinational organizations who come in, patent the seeds, and then there's no benefit sharing scheme for the communities that develop these seeds over millennia. So you can see that there is an attempt to really spread out the roots of what UPOV intended to do, which is control seed. And the fact that they're working with ARIPO at a regional level, and that's something that we opposed Ghana joining. About 5 years ago, we petitioned the president not to allow Ghana to sign onto ARIPO, but they went ahead and did it anyway. So there's a lot of lobbying going on to make sure that even at a regional level, these kinds of policies are introduced. And then again, they serve the general purpose of creating legislation in these countries, which makes it easier for these big corporations to come in, use the economies of scale to introduce what we call free seeds in the beginning, but then end up controlling the scene.
Thank you for that. And I think just to give people a little bit of a sense, one of the panelists on the later panel today brought up the idea of basically the World Trade Organization imposes UPOV, and UPOV imposes itself as a way to guarantee free trade and competition. But ultimately, what I think all know is that there is no free market when it comes to seed, that we have 4 companies controlling something in the range of 70% of the global seed market. So all it is a bullying mechanism to pry open the markets of newly independent countries that ultimately need to export now, because that's how colonization has structured their economies. And once that's the case, once they've opened up their markets, as a mandate to be able to survive, then those corporations can just come in, those same 4 corporations who are really controlling things, and make sure that any public seed institutions or the seed infrastructure that farmers have goes out the door. And Francis, I think you have thoughts on this too, exactly what threats the continent is facing at the moment.
Maybe I can just respond to Edwin a little bit, and actually just to say that, there was immense pushback by the movements in Africa against ARIPO, against the Plant Variety Protection Protocol, the Arusha Protocol, that Edwin mentioned about 5 years ago. And actually, nothing is ever dead in the water when it comes to trade agreements, but there was so much pressure and so much movement and connection of civil society and objection to that protocol that it was never fully ratified. And there were a lot of our countries actually stepped back and said, oh, okay, no, we're not going to take it any further. And so it was a great example of the power of working together and the power of the seed sovereignty networks in Africa. So the worry now is that UPOV has actually been quietly lobbying through forms of soft bribes and through the privatization, these public-private partnership agreements, where funding goes directly to our national seed agencies. And there's a lot of soft lobbying that goes on to convince them to join UPOV 91 directly, rather than through the national or the regional economic agencies and blocks. So countries can just, instead of joining the ARIPO PVP Arusha Protocol, they will just join UPOV 91 directly. And that's been facilitated through the funding that's gone to national governments to bolster the seed certification agencies that favor then the commercial corporate seed sector, whilst at the same time our agricultural research institutions and gene banks are not funded. And that's where things like farmers' rights sit, and the support to the practice of farmers' rights. So we're getting this unfair balance because of direct funding that's going actually to strengthen the commercial seed legislation, whilst at the same time criminalizing farmers' rights and so farmer seed systems. So but it was just an example of what did happen on the African continent, particularly because of the connections that were made and the power of organizations and the movements and farmers speaking out, as Edwin was saying.
And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm always aware of not wanting to pitch a doom and gloom narrative, because UPOV, of course, and plant patents, corporate consolidation of seed are all looming and they're terrifying, but also recognizing that there were 10,000 years before this. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon. And as Francis pointed out, there have been movements who have actively resisted from the minute that they smelled the push to consolidate control and privatize seeds. And so maybe if we can talk a little bit more about the seed sovereignty movement, what you've seen with the communities you've worked with, the movements you've worked with, what has been that push and where has it succeeded? Where has it been halted so that people can, our audience, everyone can understand what it means to really resist, what it means to assert and reclaim seeds in the face of these threats.
Sí, yo quiero hablar de eso.
I would like to say something about that.
Es
if I
muy
may.
importante
It is very
todos los
important
movimientos
to have
existen
movements.
en
All
el
the
mundo,
movements that are
no solo
existing
en
in the
América
world
Latina,
are very
también
important,
en
not only in Latin America,
también en
but also
África,
those movements that are
también
located
en
in
Asia,
Africa,
e
in
incluso en
Asia,
Europa
and
y
even in Europe,
aquí Estados
and
Unidos
here
y
in the
Canadá.
US, in Canada as well.
La gente está
People
buscando proyectos
are looking
locales
for local projects
para ejercer agroecología,
to carry out agroecology.
pero esta agroecología,
However, this
cuando está
agroecology,
bien,
when
cuando
it
está bien
is
tratada, cuando está bien
well
pensada,
thought,
es una recuperación
it's the recovery
de la agricultura tradicional de
of
los
the
pueblos, de
traditional
las comunidades.
agriculture of communities and older peoples.
Y entonces es simplemente volver a
Then it's
ponerse
just
unos
a matter
lentes,
of using
unos lentes, una atención especial,
the special glasses
porque
to
la,
put special attention, because
porque la deshabilitación, la discapacitación ha sido muy grande.
disabling has
Ha sido
been disabling
muy vasta, muy
grow
amplia.
seeders has been very large, has been done
Entonces
very
es
largely. Therefore,
importante
it is
insistir
important to
en que
insist
la gente
in the
recupere
fact that people need to
sus
recover
modos
their ways
y también las técnicas
to work,
modernas,
as well as modern
pero que
techniques,
sean técnicas de
but
agroecología,
they have
técnicas
to
que
be
estén pensadas
agroecology
para
techniques,
relacionarnos otra
techniques
vez
that are
con la
thought
naturaleza
to
de un
have
modo,
a
ni siquiera
real
quiero decir
relationship with the
sustentable,
nature,
porque la
not with
palabra
a sustainable
ha
way,
sido ya
because the
muy
sustainable
manoseada,
term has
pero
been
sí
corrupted,
algo que
to say
sea
so. But I
más
mean, having
equilibrado y
a
al
more
mismo tiempo
balanced
que tenga
and
una justicia y
more just
una
relationship with the
fuerza de
nature.
respeto
It
y
is important to
justicia
respect
hacia
and to
las
be fair
comunidades
with the
y también
communities
con el territorio, con la
and with
naturaleza.
the nature and the land.
Esto está ocurriendo en todos
This is
lados,
happening all over the place.
pero es curioso porque
However, it's
decimos
interesting
es una nueva
because
mirada y en realidad
we
es
say that this is a
recuperar
new
mucho de
glance,
lo que
but
había
it's about recovering what we used to have,
con un nuevo
but
modo
with
por
a new
justamente todos
way,
estos ataques.
because all these
Y no puede
attacks,
ser esto ahí, habrá, ¿cómo decir? Habrá
how can I say
controversia si
this?
ustedes quieren,
Maybe
pero
this is
no puede
very
ser
controversial, but
el campesino o la
the
campesina
peasant,
individual, ¿no?
the individual peasant cannot do
Es decir,
this by themselves.
el finquero, el granjero tampoco lo
The
pueden
farmer, the small farmer
hacer,
can't
¿no? Lo
work it
tiene
out
que
by
hacer,
themselves.
lo
This is
tiene que hacer
something
la
that has to be done
organización más
by
amplia,
a
colectiva de
wider
comunidades
organization, a
que de
collective
algún modo
community
emprendan un trabajo
that
más
can
territorial.
work together in a territory. We need a more territorial approach, to say so.
Sí, y entonces tiene que haber también
So
un esfuerzo
it
comunitario.
needs to be also a community effort.
Y eso es lo que está ocurriendo
And this
en
is what is
muchos
happening
lados.
already in many
Justamente,
places.
los proyectos son regionales
Projects are regional,
y de algún modo están logrando algo
and
que
somehow
le
they are
importa mucho
accomplishing
a las
something that
corporaciones
it's
que
very
no ocurra,
important for corporations. They don't want this to happen
que es que la gente
because
reproduzca
people
sus
are
propias semillas,
reproducing their own seeds. They
sus
don't want that.
semillas independientes por canales
They are
independientes.
having their seeds by independent channels.
Sí.
Corporations don't like that.
No quieren que se reproduzcan ni se guarden.
Corporations don't want other people to reproduce or save their seeds.
Entonces es importante que la gente
Therefore,
lo
it is
está
important
haciendo.
what people are doing right now. They
Están
are
empezando a hacer proyectos de
starting
reproducción
to
de
carry out
semillas para
seeds
que los
reproduction
canales
products.
para que los canales sean independientes
So channels can be independent.
y para poder entonces no respetar
So they don't have to respect
estas
or abide
previsiones de UPOV, ¿no?
the UPAV provisions.
Entonces, eso por lo pronto está ocurriendo en muchos lados.
And
No es
this
algo
is already
que yo
happening
quiera
in
nada
many
más.
places. This is
Está
not
ocurriendo
something that I
en muchos lados.
just want to happen. This is already happening in many places.
And Ramón, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure that I know we're running a little short on time just because of the interpretation difficulties. So I just want to leave a little space. I really appreciate all the thoughts. I wanted to get to a couple more questions before we leave open some space for questions from the audience. Again, my apologies. I'd love to hear if you're talking about this rising up and this reclamation and what's happening around the world. And I'd love to hear, Edwin, a bit considering what Food Sovereignty Ghana is going through right now in the Supreme Court in Ghana in regards to UPOV. If you could give us a little bit of a take on what's happening there, what that struggle looks like, what you're coming up against, and what insights you've had so far from that.
Okay, thank you. We've opposed what was the Planned Breeders Bill for about 7 years now. It was unfortunately passed into law last year. But basically, this is a UPOV inspired plant variety protection bill, which was very rigid. In fact, one of the clauses that we had a fundamental issue with, clause 23, was almost giving immunity to a plant breeder, stating that a plant breeder's rights would be independent of the laws of Ghana, which we felt was wrong and unconstitutional, and that leaves no traceability, no responsibility. So we lobbied hard against that. Fortunately for us, that was a small victory in the final act, which was passed. The wording was changed from giving them independence to making sure that the plant breeders' rights would be subject to the laws of Ghana. Having said that, there were other areas that we were not successful in changing. For instance, Ghana, in an unprecedented manner, has just introduced a 10-year minimum sentence for any farmer or person that is caught exchanging or saving or selling patented seeds. Now, fundamentally, that's a problem for us because even someone like me working in the industry, I don't have an eye that can tell the difference between a genetically modified cowpea, for instance, and the natural conventional cowpea. And so almost anyone can fall into this trap. And you can see that this is a reflection of how and to what extent the international UPOV regime wants to lay foothold at the grassroots level in different countries. So we oppose that from the parliamentary select committee all the way up till it was passed by Parliament, until it was assigned by the President. We opposed all these stages of endorsement. It was finally passed, and Ghana ascended to become a member of UPOV as of December 3rd, 2021. The last time we met with the government, they showed us a proposal where they were proposing a minimum 2-year sentence for farmers found guilty of exchanging seeds, which we still oppose, but behind our backs, our Attorney General, in order to please the UPOV Council, proposed 10 years, and now that is what the law is going to be here. So it's quite serious developments. We try to place an injunction on that movement in the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court sided with the government and said that we cannot stop them from joining UPOV. What we can do is oppose them when anything goes wrong. But we think that that would be, trying to tackle the issue after the horse has left the stable. So we've had quite a tough time fighting against the very, very strong lobby. And it is because of this international push to make sure that these legislation come in to favor them. And there's been a lot of pressure on trade agreements where these kind of associations are linked with trade. So the amount of aid that Ghana will get will be very dependent on how quickly we sign on to these regimes, no matter how detrimental it may be to future generations or to the future welfare of the environment and biodiversity. So it's a real issue here. And we are still in the Supreme Court trying to fight it. It's not going to be easy. Today we were in court this morning for our substantive case against Ghana going GMO, and today was the first time after 7 years that I got to testify this morning, finally. So that just shows you how long it takes for the judicial process to kick in. At some point, our entire legal docket got missing from the courts. Luckily, we had our copy, and the registrar of the courts had to accept our copy as a true certified copy and redistributed copies of our copy to other parties. So you can see the different, efforts at play here. But on the ground, this push to include Ghana in this new league of doing things and marginalizing small-scale communities and farmers and peasants is a very real issue. And communities need to come together to recognize the benefit of their indigenous knowledge and the efforts that have gone in, put in by past generations to get them to where they are. Start to see those as assets that they are closer to than these multinational corporations. So the only way to keep seeds in circulation is to grow and plant them. The only way to keep seeds, and in Norway, is to continually plant seeds, save seeds from them.
Oh, it looks like we're losing Edwin a little bit.
So that we can have seeds from these differences to recognize that as the new ones that are being pushed on them, even more so because the future benefit of germplasm when it comes to producing medicines and just any kind of technical innovation will all come from a seed, probably from a plant that we don't even recognize yet has a certain benefit.
And Francis, I'd love it if you could weigh in, considering especially that you've been in an oversight capacity and worked with movements through AFSA as the umbrella. And if you can fill in the gaps and see where other struggles in other countries have mirrored or come up against different difficulties, to give us some of the sense of the other struggles that are currently ongoing or that have happened.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we've always had a lot to learn from Ghana. and the different movements. And that's why the importance of connecting and exchange is so important. And from India, in the chat box, there's examples. The Indian law really is amazing, and we've taken a lot from the Indian law and used that as a lobby point in our countries. I mean, I think what's so interesting is the small wins that have happened, and often that has been through the ability, in Africa, it's a lot of the lobbying that goes on, traditional, a lot of our legal systems and using the court system does not work. As Edwin has just said, these processes are deeply flawed, and you'll find that things happen without due governance processes being filled, behind your back, inside doors, papers go missing, people go missing, and so lobby on the side, civil society movements have had to do as well, and really, there's the power in Africa of communities and of not forgetting family connections as well. I mean, the stories in Uganda and other places of actually laws were stopped at the last minute because of conversations that were had in church gatherings, and from the church spaces actually went to, filtered in then to messaging to the president to say, do not sign that law. And things have been stopped really at the last minute through other kinds of spaces. And so it's really important to not forget the other happenings that go on. And I think also, just that this notion of democracy that exists in all of our countries, and it doesn't matter if you have money. And so, so these are constantly things that we're having to grapple with, depending on the political context in our countries, and the different relationships that exist with trade laws or the president, the leadership at the time. So, I mean, I think just particularly when it comes to UPOV, what is being so concerning is, the subtle influence and push that it's had at country level, but then strategically using our African bodies and these spaces that were made to support African governance mechanisms. So, for instance, like the African Union and the new harmonized guidelines on seed trade regulation that will come out through the African Union. And these are directly based on UPOV standards. So although we had a win against Arepo PVP, now suddenly we're getting the same push coming through the African Union. Now, this is, the same union that also is supporting ecological organic agriculture, on the other hand. So is completely contradictory in itself, and these are mirrored in so many spaces. I mean, at the FAO, within our continental spaces, and then coming down into our regional blocks as well, and that really is to do with corporate lobby. So AGRA, funded by the Gates Foundation, sits directly at AU level, and is the one that has been really very, very key in pushing those particular guidelines to go through the African Union, as well as the biotechnology harmonized guidelines. So that is a blueprint that will be enforced then onto our countries. So, it's then using what are people's spaces, and we've seen that in the United Food Systems Summit, the exact same thing. And obviously with COVID, there's been even less capacity and space to be able to push back around these processes. And civil society really had to learn a different way of protesting and engaging with our policymakers, because we've all been shut down. So yeah, Justin, I mean, I think there's little examples, there's a lot. Open it to the others, and I know there's a lot of questions we need to speak about.
Yes, and I realize that we only have about 20 minutes left. I know Kat mentioned, or Becca mentioned, that there's the opportunity to stay to the hour if anyone is free and wants to stick around. But ultimately wanted to start to engage if the audience of things are coming up for folks who are here in our broader community. I know we have a question from Kat or a potential topic of interest, which is Mexico's requirement to ratify UPOV 91 as part of the USMCA trade agreement, and whether any of the panelists here can speak on the work that's being done, potentially in solidarity with that resistance. Ramón, maybe you have something to add there.
Sí, todos los tratados de libre comercio.
Yes, all the free trade agreements are pushing the UPOV legislations, because as we all know, UPOV is not only an agreement. In reality, it's a whole system. And that's why my colleagues are been talking about the laws related with UPOV, are laws that protect vegetables, and that somehow, as Frances has mentioned, they have like a blueprint, a matrix that have to do with UPOV. So free trade agreements and the new NAFTA, the TMEC in Mexico, and also the Trans-Pacific Agreement, all of them are pushing, supporting these legislations. And of course, there is a pushback, a rejection movement in Mexico. This rejection movement only says that we don't agree with the version 91. And they state and they support version 98, that it's less rigid, softer than the 91. However, for us in grain, the problem is the legitimation of a system that sets for or prioritize intellectual property than life. However, we have some movements. For example, in Chile, there is a huge movement against free trade agreements and against another corporation. In Honduras, for example, they just cracked down a law for vegetable protection that makes the people of Honduras stronger with the new president in charge, that it's about to sworn in, or that just sworn in. So I think it's very important that these fights, these struggles against all these legislations continue, because these legislations are favoring UPOV, and free trade agreements are not good. Mexico haven't ratified yet the 91, but pretty soon is going to ratify it.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Ramón, and that we can maybe discuss a little bit what it means to truly be in resistance. And the later panel today will be working through, again, the legal history and exactly what legal battles have been fought, or at least one or a couple cases will be shared during that panel more in depth. But the reality that, as everyone has said today, the legal system is not enough to resist. It's part and parcel, and it's worked in to these broader trade agreements and trade systems, and that this is leveraged by the folks who have the most power, which at this point is not governments, it's corporations. And ultimately, the corporations can make sure that whatever laws are in place in given countries are going to benefit them most. And so I think, I know we've talked a lot about these struggles. I would love to also leave some space for thinking of what does the hope look like? What does a future of seed sovereignty look like? Of course, seed sovereignty being the building block of food sovereignty, which is the future that I certainly want to see, and opening up to the audience, and also to our panelists, and to also the audience to share what's the collective story that we need to be all responsible for writing together, the culture that we need to be growing together that would actually give us a chance to really resist these mechanisms of trade and these legal apparatuses, these treaties on a larger scale, that's not just tackling them in isolation, but truly able to transform our systems in a lasting way. What does that look like? What take can you all give on, where we need to go moving forward?
Well, for me, I think that indigenous knowledge and culture has to be given its rightful place, because we live in a world where all the rivers and the forests, the oceans that we see were managed in a certain way based on indigenous knowledge that we came to find in within this generation. We've managed to wreck the environment. And so the role of indigenous knowledge in coming back into community life is very, very important in setting the foundation that without that indigenous knowledge, we will not recognize the wealth and the efforts that have gone into the creation of the biodiversity that we have. Without recognizing the role of indigenous knowledge, local communities will discard what they've known for millennia and go for these short-term benefits which are being sold to them like a candy on a stick. So getting back to indigenous knowledge systems is very, very, very important. Indigenous knowledge helps local communities understand things within their local context. And at the end of the day, we say that the only way to save seeds is to grow them. So it's only a reverence of indigenous knowledge that is going to make you remember the types of foods that you used to eat before it was just rice and maize, which is shipped all over the world because of the commercial and industrial applications. So for instance, in Ghana, a crop like millet or grain like fonio is less and less common, but they're alkaline grains. They're supposed to be more higher nutritional value than lots of the staple foods we eat, but these ancient foods have been discarded. So if that ancient culture was embraced, you'd find people saving those seeds, because you can only get those dishes when you plant that seed and harvest that plant. So I think indigenous knowledge and culture has a great role, even in making something like agroecology become a mainstream. Because when we talk to our government officials, the governments always say that there's no way we can feed the world through agroecology. There's no way we can, make ourselves sustainable through agroecology. But this is false, because 70% of the world is still fed by smallholder farmers. So we have to hold on to indigenous knowledge in every single area they find themselves. And that will in itself inform communities of how to preserve what they've had for centuries.
Thank you. And I just want to build on that to say that at the same time as we're recognizing the strength in indigenous knowledge, that we have to know what you need to back that up, that it's not enough to just appreciate the knowledge. It's the recognition that the sovereignty of indigenous communities has to come part and parcel with that, reverence, and that we have to see that the systems that have come in, they've come in with the disregard of knowledge, but ultimately how they function on the ground is the marginalization, the impoverishment, the seizure, the theft from indigenous and peasant communities around the world. And to see that if we really care about our seeds, our biodiversity, our future, our collective future that we're leaving for future generations, then we need to all be engaged in the struggle that communities in other parts who are being threatened by these seed treaties are already engaged in and have been for decades, that we have to recognize that that's our struggle too, and it's affecting us. We're bound in it, and it will come for all of us eventually. Francis, Ramón, thoughts on moving forward?
Sí, bueno, muy brevemente para
In a
completar.
nutshell, just to complement what they have said, I concur with what Edwin and what Justin just mentioned. It is very important for us to recognize all the projects that I mentioned before, starting from indigenous peasant Zapatist communities in Chiapas that they have their own local native seeds and that they have a full seed sovereignty there because they have been able to accomplish self-autonomy there. And this is happening in many places in the world, like the examples in Africa and also in Latin America. In Colombia, they are opposing resistance in Ecuador with the Ecuadorian indigenous movement, in Guatemala, in Honduras, in El Salvador, and Costa Rica. And all the examples in different places, like in Chile, the Mapuche people, in Argentina, the Mapuche people as well, and many other peasant projects. And this is happening as the narrative that they want to sell us. FAO was saying that it's not true that people are producing more than 70 or 60% of food, and that is fake according to the FAO. However, studies prove that peoples, as Edwin was mentioning, indigenous peasant communities are producing the vast majority of the food in the world, and we have evidence to prove that. And this is quite controversial. It has been challenged by the FAO studies, but we need to work together to change this narrative, and they don't solve our narrative. Right?
Francis, thoughts? Would love to get your input.
I was answering questions in the box in the chat, but no, I mean, our narrative, I was just thinking, about the power of the grassroots movement, and it really is building. And Grain has done amazing work around like a Stop UPOV campaign, and working with networks, and you can really see that there really is power galvanizing, and that food, there is something around that corporations, I mean, the audacity to capture and control our indigenous food systems, and that within these market spaces, within the exchange, within the spaces where seed is talked about, and the local markets where seed is sold, and the produce and food is sold, something else happens there that's more than just around calories. This is where life is built through these spaces where people come together, they build agency, they share stories. We meet each other in these spaces. They are so much more than exchange of calories. And how could we possibly ever believe that we can reduce the basis of life to things like digital sequencing information and genetics that can be held in a vault somewhere on the other side of the earth? It's all very well having the seed, but if you do not have the knowledge that goes with the seed, you cannot plant the seed, and you cannot harvest the crop that comes from the seed, and you do not know how to prepare it, and you definitely do not know how to use it in a sacred ceremony. So this is living, this is the source of life, and it is very much part of who we are. It's linked to land, it's linked to this thread that weaves through all of our lives, actually. Whether, however far we are from our ancestry and from our food systems. So I think the story around UPOV is also about people reclaiming their own narrative in all of the spaces that exist. And what's been so important around the conversations that I feel have been building over the last couple of years is that farmers are reconnecting with each other around this. And there is a much stronger push. Ramón, you can testify better than me, I'm sure, and Edwin, you've been here for longer than I have. But you know that there really is more energy to push back, to reclaim what is rightfully ours. And this is the most important thing. And it's really, really important that we do everything in our power to connect with each other, to share information, to connect farmers on the African continent with farmers on the South American continent and with yourselves. This is where we learn, particularly in the light of climate change, when things are changing so fast. We have dialogue exchanges with organic seed breeders in Europe who do not know what to do because they cannot breed seed fast enough with the changing climate. And what are we doing about this? And if we lose our genetics, we don't have the capacity to see into the future. So it is the link that ties us to the past, that connects us to the present, and enables some kind of a channel of hope, really, into the future. So that narrative is building. I really do believe so. But it has to be. We have to own it. Everyone has to own it, and that's what's really important.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that this story, this is what that we got a question about, you know, the idea that genetically modified crops are necessary to feed a growing population, or, you know, that these corporatized varieties that are really broken down into their constituent parts. They're defined by, you know, their quality. These are high yielding seeds. These are seeds that have this particular trait. And the idea that you can take this thing that has sustained humanity, that has been a co-evolutionary partner with us, and distill it into something that can be marketed, and that's the only way that you look at that. I think we need to start telling a different story, a story that Francis is telling, that every panelist, I think, here is telling. And I think that that's part of where the solidarity effort comes in, is that what we're looking at is a cultural shift, and that means a different story. It also means resources to back up that story. We need to recognize where the money flows in regards to seed, and that for anyone who's based in the US, based in the global north, based in countries where the largest seed corporations are located, we have to see how we are bound in these systems where corporations that come from within, you know, they're stripping agency, autonomy, and wealth from countries around the world and channeling it back to our own countries. And there are privileges that those of us in the US have as seed savers that folks around the world don't. And I think especially anyone who runs a seed business or is making money from seed, to understand that relationship, and that I think we just have to be aware of the commodification of something so vital, and how ultimately, if that it's not to say that making money off of seed isn't okay, but that we have to take stock of that history and that legacy, and that it can't be the only lens that we look at this. And to be aware of the policies that are in place. It takes a lot of learning. There, again, this is like a legal straitjacket, but to know what's going on and what pushes are being currently made and how we can draw awareness. I think it's very rare that anyone I tell the acronym UPOV to actually knows that it exists, even for folks who are working in the seed system and have been for some time. And that's a problem. And I think that we're in a stage of disruption and awareness generation, and it's not clear what the path forward is, but there are communities that have been doing this work and this struggle that everyone, you know, my comrades on the screen have been involved with directly for a long time, and they need to be centered in any sort of conversation around seed. And I know we've just hit 1:45 my time, which is technically the cap for our panel. I want to be conscious of our panelists' time. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer in case anyone else has questions and wants to, be here for some discussion. But I'd be eager to know if my comrades here have closing thoughts, anything to leave our audience with, or if there's anything else coming from our community in.
I think that if you look at the way seed and this has influenced culture and society in Africa, when I look at things like the UN's SDGs, for instance, trying to introduce certain values and principles which are human-centered and sensitive to the environment and the earth, you find that because of the way we revere seeds, we already had these naturally inbuilt mechanisms into our society. So respect for the environment, respect for your fellow person's ability to eat, supporting your neighbor to harvest, supporting your neighbor to plant seed, all stem from the fact that seed is recognized as a communal good. And so throughout society, you find that the position given seed, used as a dowry, used to solve conflicts, used to appease communities when there's an issue, for compensation, all go to show the very high value of seed. So it can only survive when people recognize and understand that what they have is more valuable than what is the shiny coin that is being offered to them. And that's the only way that we'll be able to bridge the future, by holding on to what we have in the past and finding out how this indigenous knowledge and these cultural ways can help make our countries more sustainable, and look at all the inbuilt moralities and taboos around seeds. For instance, every single day, farmers walk to the farm and pluck food from the earth. They could have easily planned and had a store at home and just gone to the farm on Saturday or Sunday. But the nutritional value of food that is removed from the earth on a given day is what gives the nutritional value to the food. And so for that reason, people do walk miles every morning to pluck the food. But all these things come from the fact that communities recognize the importance that a seed gives. And so the more distance you are from a seed, the more distance you are from food that's harvested, then the more a problem you are in. And I think the COVID situation has shown us that countries need to be less vulnerable by allowing their food to come from so far away through ports and harbors and have food locally grown. So it's about empowering communities to take action and own what they have already.
Yo pienso que es muy importante.
I think.
Yo pienso, perdón, voy a cambiar al.
Sorry, I'm going to switch. I think that it's very important to realize that defending seeds as things is not useful. We need to defend seeds, and we need to be with the people that has been related for million years with agriculture, with seeds, and with land. And this implies to defend their autonomy, to defend their territories. We don't want a land grabbing that pushes them out of their lands. We need them to keep on growing their traditions of breed seeders and seed keepers. If we don't have a comprehensive idea that people are important, anything can happen. All the bills are going to be passing, and that's my final comment. Thank you.
I think I've said a lot. I think just I work with incredible seed custodians on the African continent, and the most important thing is that we remember the people who make us who we are and our collective, and that who we bring to these spaces. So I deeply honor them and their ancestors. And I think what is really significant for us in the recent work is around so there's UPOV, which is private rights, private seed rights, and then there is farmers' rights. And so really farmers' rights are around how do we practice farmers' rights in practice, and that everyone can do and everyone must do everywhere. So this is really where actually things become real, is just ensuring that we are all practicing our farmers' rights or supporting those who are practicing them. And organizations like GRAIN, like AGC, from in the global arena are doing amazing work and supporting and sharing stories from us on the African continent. So thank you, and very willing and looking forward to connecting further. So thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity.
And I just wanted to give a huge thank you to the 3 other panelists who are with me today. You all have inspired me on my journey, and the reason that I'm here today is because of you all and the work that you're doing and the communities that you represent are doing on the grounds. And just always want to center on that we are trying to tell a collective story about what food, what seeds mean to us, a way of connecting ourselves in a substantive way where I think we can feel that our struggles are bound, that our hope is bound together, and that there's incredible power, I think, in feeling that the things we're doing, even though there can be trauma in the connections in our global world, that there's also a lot of beauty in that. And I'm deeply appreciative to have everyone who's here with me today. And we'll just plug again that if you want to get more into the actual mechanisms of UPOV, how it came to be, and what some of the struggles that have played out from other folks who have been invested in them, then there will be another panel in 1 hour on that. So please feel free to join me for that. Thank you to everyone who engaged, who was in the chat, and for the resources. Edwin, is it okay? I mean, I know we had a question for people's contact information. If you feel okay putting yours in the chat, no pressure at all. But yeah, please reach out if you have networks or resources or a way to get engaged in this movement. Connect with us. That's what we're here for. We're trying to build a coalition. So thank you.